Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee meeting. Today is Monday, the 24th of April, 2023. Could I just ask those present in the meeting just basically to re-familiarise themselves with the emergency procedures on the screen, and ask also any officers who may be attending via Zoom to keep their video microphones off and only switch those on if you're answering a question. And may I also respectfully ask that all cell phones present in this room are turned to silent. Thank you. The Chief Executive is an apology for the meeting today as she's on annual leave. That is why Jenny Livswitz, the CFO, is sitting here with me. I'd also firstly like to invite Councillor Briggs to kindly lead the karakia for us.
Thank you, Chair. Everyone, please feel free to join in. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia ma kina kina ki uta, kia ma taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. I've received apologies from Councillors Morgan and Barrett. Are there any other apologies or apologies for early departure that need to be noted? Thank you. I move that the apologies received from Councillors Morgan and Barrett be accepted and leave of absence be granted. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Briggs. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. That brings us to public comment on the agenda. We have 3 speakers today. Firstly, I'd like to invite Kirsty Hall to step forward and speak to the report. Kirsty, you have 3 minutes to speak, and the bell will ring at 3 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. One of the officers is just going to do that for you. Please go ahead.
I'll start. The aim of the report that you are here to meet about with regard to the Point Howard slip, the intention is to help mitigate the likelihood of similar events. Your committee has been asked to do 3 things today, and with regard to the first one, accepting the report, I want to raise a concern that I read in that report. While it's small, I think it's significant. The engineer was engaged by Hutt City Council and was not privy to even the basic information with regard to the potential impact, the large concrete car deck that sits next to the slip site. He had to guess when it was built and how it was anchored. I have 2 points to make with regard to this. Building of such structures on such sites, slip-prone Eastbourne, are in my view a high risk. My own experience of Hutt City Council and consents is not robust and definitely questionable. On this basis, I question how robust the rest of the report is. Second item that you are here is to regard noting the learning actions and have several comments and questions about this. So far, the capabilities of Wellington Water to do the job needed have currently and consistently fallen short. Number 1, where and what is the plan to develop the capabilities of Wellington Water to improve the services that are required? Number 2, is it a realistic expectation that funding and the resources be made available to support the changes that are so desperately needed? I am concerned about Wellington Water's management and the acting CEO that I met at the Larry Bay. I ask, is there a genuine intent to improve and prevent future similar events by them? I doubt this. The public who are key to being successful here should be heard, and she was not interested. Understanding the consumer perspective is vital when learning and planning for change. Next thing, in general, the public lack confidence in Wellington Water's capability. How do you propose for this to be earned back if you are to keep the current management? Will there be more accountability, transparency, and where is the oversight? On page 28 to 31, it outlines customer promise and leak priority schedule. I'd like to know how you'll ensure that Wellington Water will follow these processes. The existence of these is not enough because when in practice, they are not followed. With regard to your third event that you need to do today, which is note details of specific improvements, I wish to comment on note 8. Here it mentions a project team and even the idea of critical review is to be done. Will the project team include the voice of the customer? Will it collaborate with the customer in the design and implementation of the improvements? The voice of the people's needs to be heard and not dismissed and or ignored from the very start and right throughout the entire process. I am not confident that this is currently happening. I'd like to end with a general comment to Hutt City Council. It saddens me that you still fail to recognise the impact of the slip on the residents, the impact of their daily lives and to the valuations of their properties. From both the meeting that I attended and the report that I have read, the focus has remained on services, gas, water and power. The slip was totally preventable event, as was the damage to my property, currently sitting at a $23,000 cost to me due to Wellington Water's incompetency and failure of duty of care. I commend Hutt City Council for wanting to change and improve, but problems have to be identified honestly before solutions can be found.
Thank you, Kirsty. Members, do you have any questions for Kirsty? Please just stay there for a moment, Kirsty, in case there's any questions one of the councillors or the mayor would like to ask you. Councillor Stallinger.
Just one, thanks, Kirsty. The nature of the damage to your property that you have to fund the repair of?
I will commend Bruce Hodgins. It's skyrocketed. It's an 8-year story, and it's one I'd love to share and have offered and tried. I'm a restorative. I'm a believer in being positive. I see what Hutt City Council is trying to be positive, but you need to speak to people like me because we're not going here to whinge. 8 years ago, I arrived to my property and Wellington Water, without my permission, had trespassed and moved to Toby, of one of 3 that was minding its own business. During that work, they made a really badly cut square in my driveway. During that work, they put in a faulty connector, unbeknown to me. So last year, it started to leak, unbeknown to me, and then eventually spurred out. And my interactions with Wellington Water were diabolical. At one stage, my neighbour was flooded to his knees. It was categorised as urgent, Friday by me at 4 o'clock. The water continued, the jobs kept getting cancelled. Reason, they did not have the staff. There was a priority for somewhere else to go. I understand that, but the damage sunk and cracked my drive. Wellington Water refused to own it. I took them to the disputes. That was the wrong person, I learnt. Sorry, but you've asked the question. That was the wrong, I should have taken Hutt City Council. They hid behind any lack of liability or negligence. The man at the court case was asked to tone it down by the judge. He was a bully. He had never visited the driveway. I take my hat off to Bruce Hodgins. I went back to him. He actually came to my house. We engaged in a civil conversation, and I have had a settled case of half of the bill. However, I haven't been able to get a contractor in. It's doubled in cost. Why, as someone looking for retirement, should I be paying $23,000 for total incompetency of Wellington Water? So that was the backstory, briefly. Yep.
Thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, Councillor Stallinger. Just going to pause for just one moment and ask if any of the officers present wish to comment on anything that Kirsty has raised or clarify anything before we move to the next speaker. Thank you. I'll then ask Colin Robertson, who wishes to also speak, to step forward, please. Good afternoon, Colin. Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
So I'm a resident of Point Howard, behind the slip, affected by the slip. My background is a construction project manager, managing projects up to $100 million in size. So this is, I understand the details of what's involved here. Okay. So on Friday, I wrote an email to Joe Miller and copied it to Campbell Barry and Joe's EA. Dear Joe Miller, I'm a resident of Point Howard and have been adversely affected by the recent slip. On the 14th of March, there was a significant slip at Point Howard, and services and access were lost to approximately 33 properties above the slip site. So 33 properties, it's worth considering. Services and partial access were restored within a few days, which was a good achievement. Hutt City Council engaged NGO, who's a geotech engineer. Personally, I've used NGO in a number of projects, and they're very competent. NGO prepared a report which is attached. I've circled specific areas. The key points in this report moving forward are: the report details that the remaining approximately $3.8 meters width of road is founded on both rock and fill material, not just rock, fill material. The risk analysis notes it is possible, and possible is the word they use, that a further 1 meter width of road width would be lost in a further slip, and the consequences would be disastrous. This would mean that the road access would be lost entirely. Okay, so the points to note here is NGO are saying that the road is still half on rock, half on slip, and that's the lane that remains. Okay. NGO recommended as a short-term action, and short-term action is the words they use, that the vehicles are limited at 2.5 metres width, 3.5 tonne gross weight, and a 10-kilometre speed limit, and further recommend no stopping above the landslide and within 10 metres either side of the landslide. The no stopping recommendation is obviously a reflection of their concern for the safety of users. The affected Point Howard residents have all been quite patient understanding of the situation. However, there was a Hutt City Council and residents meeting approximately 2 weeks ago where Hutt City Council laid out the plans and programme for carrying out a retaining structure and reinstating the road, and said the programme for completion is April 2024, a year away. The timescale is not satisfactory, and the procurement approach from Hutt City Council does not take into account the urgency, the emergency nature of these works, and NGO safety concerns. So in the email to Joe Miller, I've circled the relevant parts of the NGO report, which says that a slip is possible and the consequences are disastrous, and saying it's short term. Short term isn't 12 months. Okay. And also has due consideration be given to the following: no fire appliance access. This limits their effectiveness in dealing with fires and other emergency events. Any residents that have planned to carry out building work will not be able to proceed. There is no truck access. Any residents who need to move house cannot get a moving truck to their house. And residents who are trying to sell the property is so much harder. I have a neighbour who's trying to sell the property and they had to give up with open homes. My business is project management of major civil engineering building projects, and I offered a bit of a timeline here and sort of pointed out that potentially a building consent isn't required because of various parts in the Act, which I've noted here.
Thank you, Colin. Mr Mayor, councillors, do you have any questions or any points you would like to ask Colin for clarification of in his input, please? Councillor Briggs, we'll go to you first and then come back to the Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Colin. I obviously haven't seen the entirety of your email. Thank you for your presentation today. Can we get that forwarded on from officers to the rest of members as well?
Yes, Councillor Briggs, we'll make sure that happens. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Colin. Really appreciate you taking the time to send the email on Friday. I picked it up. I was away last week, but picked it up this morning, and just wanted to certainly reinforce that will go to our team to consider and provide a response directly back to you as well. But I do appreciate that you've taken the time to think about how we can move things along quickly. Certainly from our perspective, the sooner we can fix the slip, the better. So any suggestions that help with that are definitely received with open ears. So,
well,
yeah.
I think the important point to note is that it's like the Hawke's Bay situation with the cyclone. You have emergency situations, you have to reinstate access. You know, council have got normal procurement procedures, normal public consultation procedures. The point is, I believe you're using the wrong procedures for what's an emergency situation. And the NGO report makes it clear that it is a possible catastrophic situation if the road is lost. And they're saying that is a possible occurrence, and they recommend certain short-term actions, and short-term actions isn't taking a year to reinstate it. So I think council can certainly improve the time it takes to you engineer the retaining wall and get the work finished.
Thank you, Colin. As the Mayor has noted, the email received on Friday will be looked at by certainly the council officers. I'm sure if that situation will be considered as well. I'm just going to ask the officers who are present if there is anything that they would like to comment on with respect to your input, your presentation today, Colin, and just clarify anything.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm John Kingsbury. Thank you, Colin, for the email. I've read that this morning as well, since it's come in. So we're working really closely with NGO, who are our trusted geotech partners on this piece of work. We're ahead of schedule already, and I just want to kind of the timeframes that we put out at the meeting 3 or 4 weeks ago were absolute worst case scenario, and built into that was if there's a myriad of other slips around the city or around the region. So there are limited resources, and as we saw last week, we had to actually take NGO off that piece of work for a couple of days to go to Eastern Hutt Road. So we've only got limited people that can actually expertise in the region to be able to do this. So progress is continuing to be made. We are ahead of schedule and aiming to have a concept design by the end of this week. So, but we are still working with them as fast as possible. In terms of, there'll be some testing on site next month for anchor shotcreting and bolts. So, and from there, we'll get a detailed design. So we want to get to a point where we've got a recommended solution within the next month for further design. So completely get your timeframes. I have tested them with NGO as well, and given it's not practical at this to be able to do that in those small windows, but we're going as fast as possible. And I would hope that we've been through the process and we'll have construction crews up there. My hope is that by early spring, if not earlier. But worst case scenario, again, depending on what happens in the region.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Thank you, Colin.
Early spring. You see early spring. Still 2024.
This year.
Spring, this is spring now.
It's autumn.
Sorry. Northern hemisphere.
Okay. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you. We have a third member of the public wishing to provide input today, and that's Andrew Weir, I believe. Andrew, would you like to step forward, please? You have 3 minutes, and the bell will ring at the end of
I'll
those.
be pretty short and
Thank you,
sweet.
Andrew.
Thanks. I've read the report, and it's very, very good. It covers basically every aspect. The thing that concerns me, and it just follows on by what Kirsty and Colin have said, that on page 21, there's a sequence of events regarding the customer contact and the info that was provided. It's very well laid out, not that easy to read if you print it out, but it basically shows a very concerning amount of time between when the Wellington Water and the council were first contacted by people that were concerned. If you read below, I mean, it's a joke. It's just appalling. The wrong site was, Wellington Water went to the wrong site in one case. All the way through, information was lost, information wasn't passed on. There seems to be not only a communication problem within Wellington Water itself, but between Wellington Water and the council. Now, I understand going forward that this is going to be fixed, but my point is, yeah, that's fine, and that will hopefully help others out, including the 6 other events for the other where people have made complaints that are now being put forward as priority. But, you know, adding on to this that the Wellington Water is basically saying that, yeah, the poor communication problem, trying to add in there that 22 mils of recent rain, that obviously, I mean, that's kind of an insult really, because it didn't have anything to do with anything. This is to do with the fault of Wellington Water and the fact that they didn't do anything of any note to actually stop this occurring, and it could have been stopped. And that's obvious to anybody that reads this report. So now we're left in a spot where the guy below can't sell his house. Colin knows somebody that can't sell their houses. No one would be able to sell their houses while this is going on at the moment. So compensation to those that live on the other side, like myself. You know, we pay rates based on the value of our homes. We now, we have to load up our cars and take our stuff across to where the bins are, which isn't a major, but that's what you're paying your rates for. Yeah, sorry, I'll just need to, just briefly. So the value of our houses have gone down while this occurs. So if that's the case, why don't we pay less rates? Because you can't get fire engines through. Anyone that looks at buying a house there is not going to go anywhere near the place. You can't get people to bring, like I got some flat packs. I had to drive down to get them. I had to go to Iron Mountain because they wouldn't send a truck round. There are so many things. A fire engine could not fit through the gap currently there at the moment. So there needs to be some sort of compensation, not just, okay, we just admit this is all wrong and it's unfortunate.
Okay.
And
Thank you,
move
Andrew.
on.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Jenny, is there anything that you would like to comment to the points that Andrew has made with respect to the rating on the properties?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, you know, the rating legislation is quite restrictive. I think there is an aspect in the rates from missioners, potentially an area that we need to have a closer look into around our policy on that. So that's a piece of work that I'll get onto with the team. I think that's
Thank you.
one area that I can think of off the top of my head that could be appropriate, but I need to do a bit more investigation there.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jenny. And that area in the Rating Act has been used in other jurisdictions in New Zealand for similar reasons of recent times. So I appreciate if you would take that on board for people here today. Mr Mayor, councillors, are there any questions or points you would like to discuss with Andrew? No? Thank you for coming along today, Andrew, and your input. I'm just going to ask the officers if they have anything additional that they may add. No? Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the three of you for coming along today. Now move to item 4 on our agenda, which is the conflict of interest declarations, and ask whether any member has a conflict of interest to declare relating to any item on the agenda. Thank you. I do have a declaration to make, and that is that I have an interest in item 9 on today's agenda as the Deputy Chair of Te Wahanga, the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission. However, I feel that it is in part mitigated by the early public submissions made by Te Wahanga to the Environment Select Committee and the reports recently provided to the Department of Internal Affairs, having been published on Te Wahanga's website on the 4th of April. The reports are available to all elected members, officers and the public. And my second declaration of interest that I've asked the officers to update is that I've been reappointed to the board of Quotable Value, including Quotable Value Australia, until 30 April 2026, and will be elevated to the Deputy Chair with effect from the 1st of May 2023. And that's been updated on Council's website. Thank you. I'll then move to item 5, which is the Howard Road Slip Report, which is on page 11 of the agenda. And I'd like to invite Andrea Blackshaw, the Director, Neighbourhoods and Communities, to speak to the report. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I address the paper, I just would like to thank everybody who's come to speak about this today. Residents, you'll have seen from the report, the residents did a great job of raising concerns about this at the time, and they're now doing a great job of holding us to account on it as well. The only reason I didn't make any comment when Kirsty spoke was that Kirsty and I had a chat out at the Lowry Bay Yacht Club, and I know she's had a number of conversations with Bruce and other officials, and we are really keen to understand what happened in her situation and what are the additional learnings that we can get out of that maybe aren't reflected in the review around this one event. So she'll learn a little bit more background from that. So that's been really helpful. I also think that I probably just want to repeat the apology that we made when we came to the community meeting, which was, that to apologise to the community for the disruption and the stress that has been caused by this event. And certainly, absolutely, Council and Wellington Water accept there were shortcomings in the way we dealt with things. The review, obviously, some of them have been talked about today, and the review obviously talks to that as well. So I just wanted to repeat that as well today because it seems appropriate, given we've got members of the community here with us today. So you've received a copy of the joint Wellington Water and Council review of the slip that happened at Howard Road in March. You'll see from the report that it's based on the initial assessment that it says that a slip was likely occurred due to a combination of the leaking water pipe and also recent rainfall at the time. But the report also says that Wellington Water and Council fell short of expected service levels in the way that it was managed. This report was initially shared with the Point Howard and Sorrento Bay community on April 5th at Lowry Bay Yacht Club. That meeting was attended by the Mayor and by a number of officials and allowed time for both the presentation of the report, also a presentation on what was happening around the remediation of the road, and also some time for questions from the community. And since then, we've had ongoing communications with residents, mostly through the Point Howard Residents Association, who've done a fantastic job of advocating on behalf of their residents. The report recommends some specific actions for Council and for Wellington Water to help better manage both the receipt of and flow of information at both organisations and between both organisations, and around the prioritisation of leaks during that process. Some of the things that could be done were immediate, and they were done immediately as soon as we became aware of these issues at Council's end and at Wellington Water's end. Some immediate changes were made. There were also some mid-term improvements that need to be made, and we have at Council a team now working on the mid-term arrangements. So what are the things that require a little bit more work to be done, but need to be done really quickly? So some of those are underway, and there are some longer-term improvements that we need to make, which will be part of our broader customer service excellence project, which will include the introduction of some kind of CRM or customer relationship management system in the future. And as you would have seen, a lot of the shortcomings came down to the way our interactions with the community between Council, Wellington Water and the community were managed. This report's also going to go to the Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee, and as part of the regular Wellington Water work program that reports there, they will monitor that the improvements are being made, both here and at Wellington Water. The costs associated with the road remediation, once that work's been done, that will go to the annual plan LTP subcommittee, and so they'll consider the costs for the improvements. And I'm happy to, unfortunately, don't have Bruce Hodgins here with us today, but the other officers who are here and myself, we're happy to answer any other questions that people might have.
Thank you, Andrea. Mr Mayor, councillors, are there any questions you have for Andrea or one of the other officers present? Councillor Briggs, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Andrea. As regards to the conversations with Wellington Water post the report coming to light, what's been progressing there as well as their accountability around reporting to their learnings and what they'll be implementing as well, and what are the timeframes around them doing that bit of work?
So just like us, they have a project team at their end who are looking at some of the areas. Some of theirs are a slightly longer fix. A lot of ours are around that first point of contact, but they've got a project team working on that now, and then together we're working on the things that work between us. So we're going to have a very robust level of accountability around our own improvements, but we'll extend that to Wellington Water as well, and they would want us, I'm sure they would want us to as well, to make sure that we are eliminating everything we can so that we don't have events like this in the future. So both organisations are doing their own work, and we are both working together to make sure we're accountable.
Just to follow up if I can, Chair.
Certainly, Councillor Briggs.
And so that work from the Wellington Water project team, will that report and information be coming through this committee as well, so we're aware of what they're doing and how they're tracking, so we as a city can have reassurance that they are implementing the recommendations?
It will come back to this committee, but it'll also go to the Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee as part of that broader program of work. So Wellington Water come to that committee to speak to the program of work, and councillors will have a chance to talk to them at that time about this.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs, and thank you, Andrea. Are there any further questions? Mr Mayor?
Cool, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if you could speak a bit more to some of those immediate steps that have been taken, particularly from a Hutt City Council point of view in our own processes, where clearly there were failings in this report, and what immediate things have been done to try and mitigate as much as possible these types of issues while those longer term solutions are currently being worked through.
I can pick that one up through you, Madam Chair. The picked this in the report, but we've immediately set up an internal project team to advance some of those short-term improvements. One of the first things that we've done is engage with Wellington Water, so between our customer experience lead and Wellington's customer experience lead, to begin to develop a very clear understanding of that customer journey and to ensure we're mapping out where the fixes can be made. We're looking to advance in the short term a project to establish a more robust internal knowledge base. So that basically means that our staff and our contact centre will be providing a consistent experience in terms of the questions, the prompts and the information that's been recorded. That's something that we can do in the short term that doesn't require a substantial investment around technology. And in terms of the conversations from between Wellington Water and ourselves, that's when we'll be able to understand some of the short-term improvements we can make within existing technologies. It would be too soon to speak to exactly what some of those may be, but it largely is around information flow and ensuring that the systems are interacting with each other in a way that's reducing duplication or error. We've had some experience in doing this recently with waste management and improving the customer journey with our rubbish and recycling service. So we've certainly had experience doing that in recent months, and we'll be looking to repeat in effect that experience with Wellington Water. So we will be advancing that project in the coming weeks, but it has been done with some urgency.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Stallinger.
Just a quick one. I noticed in the recommendation it says a report coming to a future meeting of this committee, and you've mentioned the Infrastructure Committee. I'd just like it if you could perhaps confirm that we will get an update to our next meeting, which will be some 3 months here. I mean, it's a significant amount of time, I'm sure, in terms of residents and others with an interest.
Yes, we will.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Councillor Stallinger. If there's no further questions, I'll move the recommendations, and I'm aware, Councillor Stallinger, you would like to add something. So I'll go through the recommendations in the report first and then ask you to speak to the one you wish to add. The recommendations are that the subcommittee recommends that Council A notes and receives the review attached as Appendix 1 to the report. B notes the learnings and the actions to help mitigate the likelihood of similar events in the future. And C notes that the details of specific improvements will be reported to a future meeting of the subcommittee once the project team has completed its detailed review of processes and training requirements. And as you have just heard in response to that question, that will be the next meeting, our next committee meeting. Thank you. So, sorry, the CFO has just pointed out to me that it is showing on the Audit and Risk Committee work program for the meeting on the 27th of June, that there is to be a further report. Thank you for that clarity. So, Councillor Stallinger, you advised me just as we were starting the meeting that you would like to add to the recommendations.
Yes, just a bit of a background to that, if I can have a bit of a comment now. Terrible event. Shocking for the residents and for council staff and all of us. I do feel a little bit relieved that something worse didn't happen, but here we are. I've been impressed with the reporting, analysis and work that's been done so far since the event. A lot of detail in the investigation into what happened. I was surprised, like one of our speakers, as to the number of times the contact was made, but yet it didn't seem to get through with the required action. A lot of the comments I hear from the officers, our mayor and others I like the way accountability has been taken and how it's being approached. So I just want to congratulate everyone for their involvement since then. So my only point is, on reading through this stuff, I felt a disconnect between the covering report and everything we're hearing and everything that's in the attachments. Because if you just read the covering report, it sounds like, you know, Wellington Water got onto it, repaired the leak, and then we had a slip. We know there's a lot more to it than that. So I thought about how that would be best remediated from my perspective, and I think it's in the recommendations, hence my suggestion.
Yes, so your can you, so that we can capture your recommendation, are you able to read that to us?
This might be a bit long-winded, so we might have a shorter way, but note the report's findings that the water leak likely contributed to the slip and that miscommunications between Council and Wellington Water appear to have resulted in the leak not having been afforded priority status on a timely basis. And then we go on to our, the other recommendations. That would be recommendation B, or before current recommendation B. If I can just say one more comment in relation to that. I feel that gives, well, I'm thinking if I'm a resident, I feel I would believe that this committee has afforded it the seriousness which the event deserves.
Thank you, Councillor Stellinger. So, Catherine, did you capture that?
I might need to just flip that to me a bit more. I've got note the report's findings that the water leak contributed to the slip. If you could just read that again. If you come here, that would be.
And then we can,
thank you.
We can add that to the report and then show Councillor Briggs whilst we're doing that.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Jenny's earlier comments around looking at what tools are available around rates remissions, just seeing whether you'd want to have a recommendation as well for that direction, or just leaving officers to come back.
And I'm certainly comfortable if Councillor Briggs, you would like to have that as a recommendation, that officers review the rate remission provisions in the Rating Act. So we would add that. That would become Councillor Stellinger's addition would be B. The existing B would be C, and your suggestion, Councillor Briggs, would become the D, and then what is C on our report becomes recommendation E. So if we can, Catherine, have we got that? If we don't, we just take a moment and then I'm going to read that list of recommendations to you all again. Councillor Briggs? Yes.
And if possible, Chair, could we get them on the screen so we
That's
can...
what, yes.
Thank you.
That's what we're trying to do. So please just indulge us for a few moments. Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors, officers and members of the public. We're just about to bring the revised list of recommendations up on the screen. And then I'll read those through again. Thank you, Catherine. So again, I will review the recommendations. They are now that the subcommittee recommends that Council A notes and receives the review attached as Appendix 1 to the report. B notes the report's findings that the water leak likely contributed to the slip and that the miscommunication between Council and Wellington Water Limited appear to have resulted in the leak not having been afforded priority status on a timely basis. C notes the learnings and the actions to help mitigate the likelihood of similar events in the future. D, officers review the rates remission policy, sorry, Catherine? Remission, yes, policy and report back to the subcommittee. And E, notes that the details of specific improvements will be reported to a future meeting of the subcommittee once the project team has completed its detailed review of processes and training requirements. I think we should amend that final one, Catherine, with respect to putting in the date. Will be reported to the subcommittee meeting on the 27th of June.
Just one minor edit, having request officers rather than just officers.
Sure. No, we'll add the wording to request. Mr. Mayor?
If we could have that, those recommendations back up on the screen. Sorry, okay. So just on scale, I can see it from there. So just on recommendation B, and I certainly have no problem with the intent from Councillor Stallinger, no issue at all with having that in there. I just want to ensure that it is entirely accurate. So the comment around miscommunication between Council and Wellington Water appears to have resulted in the leak not being afforded priority status. I don't think that's entirely correct, because there was failings, I think, on both ends, as well as communication, but also in regards to steps, for example, that Wellington Water didn't take at their end, which would have resulted in it being afforded a priority status. So I don't actually think that's quite correct, but I get the intent though. So I'm just, is there anything from the report that we can use which does accurately describe what actually did happen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Andrea, are you able to assist us there?
It might be easiest to take the words out of the executive summary. And notes that on the initial assessment, the two things that contributed. And then pick up the piece around
Andrea, you're referring to the executive summary, which is on
the
page 17.
review.
It's Appendix 1. It's actually the actual report.
16.
16?
Yes, it's the actual review.
Yeah, which is the two events are the leaking water pipe
And the recent
rainfall.
And then the part that talks about both Hutt City Council and Wellington Water fell short of achieving expected levels of service in some aspects, because it was a number of areas. Yeah. Yeah.
So you are suggesting, Andrea, that B would be in response to the Mayor's point and actually getting this, noting your point, Councillor Stallinger, but actually making sure we've got this factually correct, is that the report's findings that the leaking water pipe, the rainfall event that occurred the previous day, and the fact that both in some aspects Hutt City Council and Wellington Water fell short of achieving expected levels of service in line with the customer promise would be the more appropriate way to word that. Are you comfortable with that, Councillor Stallinger? Mr Mayor? Did you get on with that, Catherine?
The leaking.
Water pipe, comma.
If it's helpful, Madam Chair, I think it's just literally taking those statements from the executive summary.
Yes.
Yeah. If it would be quite long, but I mean, if it's probably the most accurate way to do it.
It is quite long, so bear with us while Catherine brings that in.
You want the full two bullet points in here?
Yes. Thank you. So apologies to everyone. Please, again, we want to get this right.
Do we
So-
want to just take a quick 5 minutes to get this right?
Yes, we'll just take a quick 5-minute recess whilst our officer has a chance to bring that full edited recommendation together, and then we'll resume. Thank you. I'll first ask Jenny if there's any comments she wishes to make, and then John ask if there's any comment you wish to make before we open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so the next three reports on the agenda are all about our audit plans for the year-end audits and annual reports. First up, I just want to thank John for his helping us in pulling together these plans early in the process and giving us clarity around resourcing and our timeframes. There's been a bit of backwards and forwards, agreeing dates and so on that work for us, and we're really pleased with where it's landed now. This year round, we've got the earlier statutory deadline of the 31st of October. It used to be that date, and for the last 3 years, we've had an extended timeframe, initially because of COVID and then because of audit resourcing. So this year, we're back to the normal statutory deadline, 31st of October. So the report talks about our process that we plan to run, and we welcome any feedback around that process. So first up, we'll have the normal quarterly performance reporting that'll go through to the Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee. And then for the Audit and Risk Subcommittee, we'll bring to the committee a unaudited annual report. That'll be in September. In October, once the audit's progressing, we'll have the annual report going through to the Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee. And then at the end of October, we'll have council adoption of the annual report. That's kind of our high-level plan. The report does talk to some of the key focus areas of the audit, and there's obviously the detailed audit plan attached to the report as well. So happy to take any questions. Or John, do you want to comment?
John, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chair. Not much. Just to say, in terms of the focus area, the main changes in our audit plans this year compared to last would be picking up the new effective standard on service performance reporting, which does place additional reporting obligations onto council. So we've put that in the plan there just to highlight that. And then in terms of the other key risks from last year were around the completion of valuations for infrastructure assets, but this year it'll be around the assessment of those as fair value against what's reported, considering there are still a number of pressures, cost pressures in that space. Probably all for me.
Thank you, John. And obviously the key point also being, as Jenny has mentioned, that the statutory deadline, as it normally is, no extensions permissible this year. So it's quite a tight timetable. But thank you, John. Thank you, Jenny. Are there any questions for either John or Jenny? No, thank you. I'll move the recommendations then, and they are for this report that the Subcommittee 1 receives and notes the Audit New Zealand audit plan for the group annual report for the year ended 30 June 2023, attached as Appendix 1 to the report. 2, notes the statutory deadline for the completion of the group annual report 2022-2023 is 31 October 2023. 3, notes the planned external audit and review process, which includes reporting back to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee as outlined in paragraphs 3, 4 and 5 of the report. And 4, notes the focus area for the external audit, which includes the performance measures related to Wellington Water Limited. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stallinger, thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, and appreciate you taking the time to be here as always. I suppose I just wanted to flag, of course, with water reform coming up and how we navigate through that as a council, as has been well highlighted here. And I know that there will be conversations up and down the country of how we get through the long-term plan and planning in general. And I suppose I just wanted to take this opportunity to reinforce that ongoing communication or sharing of information from both us and Audit New Zealand around how we navigate that, particularly if there are other insights of how other councils are doing it. I know that will already be happening, but I think that this will be obviously something at the top of the radar for yourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as I've noted in my interest declaration, there's a lot of work being done on this by the Infrastructure Commission as well. And that work, as it is done, as much as it can be made public, is made public on the website. So that's an additional source of information. Thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak against the motion? I have a mover and a seconder, being Councillor Stallinger, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. We'll move on to item 7, which is on page 75 of the pack. And this is continuing, as Jenny said, this is continuing the audit updates. This is the external audit update for Seaview Marina Limited. Jenny, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just a couple of comments for Seaview Marina and the CCOs. Their statutory deadlines also move earlier, so it's the 2nd of October. So we're planning around that. And also just a note that once the annual reports have been completed and signed out by audit and been through their boards, then they will come through to council, and that'll be at the September Policy, Finance and Strategy Committee. Seaview Marine is a little bit easier than the previous one we just dealt with, so I'm happy to take any questions here.
Thank you. Before we go to questions, John, is there anything you'd like to add? No, thank you. Are there any questions? No, thank you. I'll then move the recommendation in front of you, and that is that the subcommittee receives and notes the Audit New Zealand audit plan for Seaview Marina Limited annual report for the year ended 30 June 2023, attached as Appendix 1 to the report. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Thank you. Any member who'd like to speak against it? No, thank you. I have a mover and a seconder, so I will now put the motion, and that all those in favour say aye, all those against say no. Aye. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Moving on, again, another audit update, that is the external audit update. It's item 8 on our agenda on page 92 for Urban Plus Limited, which is both the parent and the group. And again, Jenny, is there anything you would like to add?
Not this time, thank you. It's very similar to the other ones before.
Correct, it is. John, anything from your perspective? No, thank you, it's similar as well. Any questions for either John or Jenny? No, thank you. I'll then move the recommendation in front of you, and that is that the subcommittee receives and notes the Audit New Zealand audit plan for Urban Plus Limited Group annual report for the year ended 30 June 2023, attached as Appendix 1 to the report. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Any member who would like to speak against the motion? I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much, John, for your attendance and your support. Moving on, item 9 in our agenda is highly topical, Three Waters Reform, Transitional Activities, which is on page 138 of the agenda. And as you may already be aware, we don't have Bruce with us today, unfortunately. Jenny is here, however. We do also have Dougal List, who is an associate partner of Scott's Consulting, Regional Transition Coordinator and Wellington Water Limited Advisor, who is kindly joining us via Zoom for this item. Good afternoon, Dougal.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Jenny, would you like to lead off, please, with any comments you would like to make with this report, and then I'll ask Dougal to do the same.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I can give you a bit of an overview of the finance content. I just want to say that the report was written before we got all the government announcements, so that's the context. We have added in a little section at the end of the appendix that talks to the government's announcements, but it's very high level. And obviously when we report back, we're going to be reporting at each committee meeting going forward on Three Waters Reform. So we'll obviously update that with, as best we know, the changes that are ahead. So I'll leave the front section of the report for Dougal to talk to and give us a bit of an overview and probably talk to the government's announcements. I can just briefly give you an overview of the finance content. Shall I jump into that? Yeah.
Please, Jenny, and then we'll come back to Dougal.
Okay. So from paragraph 12 of the report, there's some content around the finance aspects. There's some information around the broader strategic outlook, and then some more details around the transition activities that we've been doing. Initially, the paragraph 12 and 13, I've provided some information around what we expect that balance sheet carve out to look like. So the debt levels, assets, revenue, and so on. And there's some information based off our latest draft annual plan. I do need to highlight that this is really based on some key assumptions that we've got a lot of uncertainty around, exactly how the NTU is going to agree our debt levels, the mechanism that they're going to have to pay us out the debt. It looks like currently it's going to be spread out over a 5-year period, where initially we've always assumed that we'd get paid out the full amount up front on day one. So there are some real fundamental gaps in certainty around some of this information. I have in paragraph 14, there's a reference to the Standard & Poor's report, and I've pulled out some of the key points from that report. And, attached to this report, we've got that detailed content from Standard & Poor's. I thought it was important that we table it, and you've got the opportunity to read it and see it. Just want to highlight one aspect, one of the key points there. The third one down, it says, analysis of the Three Waters infrastructure reforms is difficult because of the lack of reliable information. The reform appears to accelerate improving trends in the 21-31 long-term plans, but we believe the financial forecasts within these plans are rosy. And so, I think we've got to take the S&P report with the context that it was written in and the assumptions they've used. We know that our budgets for Three Waters investment have really changed quite dramatically since we set those long-term plans. We've had a whole lot of cost escalations. And so I think they've really done well in calling them rosy. I think that's a true reflection, certainly relevant for us. I go on in the report basically to talk about some of the uncertainties around the numbers, and there's some details around the process we've been going through with the National Transition Unit, trying to make sure that they get all the information they've requested from a finance aspect, and deal with all the aspects that are going to change. So at the moment, we don't have any confirmation around exactly what our debt amount would be that they've agreed for the 30th of June 2022. We need them to land that, and we need them to land the methodology that's going to be applied going forward to give us certainty. At this stage, that's not clear. So I've just sort of spelt out those risks, and it's a bit frustrating. I'd like it all to be nice and clearer, and it would certainly help with our long-term plan process, where we're going to have to keep working on some key assumptions until we get that clarity. And the report also just finally talks about the process in regards to the draft annual plan and some extra information that we've had to give NTU around our revenue settings. So it's quite interesting that they're looking at those revenue settings for Three Waters compared to non-Three Waters, and trying to understand our plans there. So probably best, I'm happy to take any questions, but probably best if we go to Dougal next and he jumps into the rest of the report. Yeah. Thanks, Dougal.
Thank you, Jenny. Dougal, could we ask you to perhaps please provide us with an update and an overview of the recent announcement, and just any sort of other insight you may be able to offer, obviously noting that there is a high degree of uncertainty, as Jenny's alluded to in some aspects of that, but also obviously the obvious piece there too is there's not a lot of time to actually, if this legislation is going to be enacted, to actually get that through the House.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, you've highlighted some of those key risks and challenges there. So just to introduce myself and my role is to work with the shareholding councils in Wellington Water Limited to make sure we've got a coordinated program across water reforms and transition. We need to do this as we share people, systems, data between the councils at Wellington Water. So we operate at a number of levels. Politically, we have a steering group of the CEs, which Joe Miller sits on, and we have a working group, which includes Bruce Hodgkins and others across the councils in Wellington Water, to make sure we're coordinating activity and responding to the transition program from the NTU. On the 13th of April, the government announced some quite significant changes to the reforms program. Most significant really is the change to the number of entities, which increases that from 4 to 10. So it means that we're now going to be working in a more regional model across Wellington. So the 6 Wellington Water Councils plus Masterton, Carterton and Kapiti Coast. This definitely has some advantages in terms of fewer moving parts and a regional model which we're quite used to working within, and good regional relationships that we can leverage off. While it's a kind of a a numbers change in terms of the water services entity, it does have quite considerable implications in terms of the timeline of the program, because the second major aspect of the government announcements was a change to the implementation date or the establishment date. So rather than being 1 July 2024, they've announced a kind of a staged establishment date from around 2025 to a hard backstop of 1 July 2026. Other key aspects of the reforms largely remain the same. Probably the other kind of key aspect is that the government's been very clear that governance sits with the board, or a competency-based board, which is overseen by a regional representative group, which would have membership from all councils within a regional area, along with an equal number of iwi Māori representatives. Some of the key implications for the change is certainly that council will need to consider the issues around the long-term plan, as Jenny was outlining, and currently that's quite unclear around the parameters on which to base the LTP and for how long council will need to provide for water funding in the LTP. So that's one of the key issues that we're still working through. We are expecting a lot more guidance and information from DIA and the NTU over the next 2 or 3 months, and that's likely to include further policy decisions from government. They intend to continue to enact the Water Services Legislation Bill and the Economic Efficiency and Customer Protection Bill, which are before the Select Committee at the moment. There's likely to be further legislation required, and as you note, Chair, it's quite a tight timeline to do that, and that would need to amend the number of water services entities, change the start date, and enable councils to actually include water in the 2024 LTP, which currently by law we're not able to do. And that will need to also be supported by budget decisions to give effect to the reforms, which would include funding support for councils through this reform period, because there's currently no funding for councils for reforms going forward. So it's quite a big reset for the National Transition Program, and we are expecting further detail over the next 2 or 3 months. And so we're obviously actively thinking about the risks and opportunities that reset presents, and how we can most effectively work with both the National Transition Unit and the establishment entity to give effect to an efficient reform, which really results in, seamless transition for customers and, no loss of, or minimises loss of momentum of the delivery program going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dougal. That's very helpful. Mr. Mayor, councillors, are there any questions of either Dougal or Jenny, please? Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Chair. Just the flow-on effect of this for our council around our financial policies, and will there be any review or update of financial policies in line with the LTP, and what's that kind of work plan looking like as well?
Yes, so we're definitely planning a review of financial strategy, a revenue and financing policy, as part of our LTP process anyway. We're going to obviously have to take the 3 waters elements as best we know them and weave that into our policy settings. It could well be that we maybe, it's kind of a 2-step process. We do the bulk of it up front, and then towards later this year in sort of November, when we've got better clarity around the 3 waters pieces, that we then pull it together. But yes, we're definitely going to have to review them, and adjust to reflect the changes.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs, and thank you, Jenny. Are there any further questions? No, thank you. I'll then move the recommendation. That is simply that the subcommittee receives and notes the information. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Briggs. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Any member who would like to speak against the motion? I have a mover and a seconder in Councillor Briggs, so I'll then put the motion. All those in favour say aye, against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. And thank you, Dougal, for your time and joining us today. Apologies, we have kept you a little longer than intended. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on into item 10, which is the sensitive expenditure disclosures, which are on page 175 of our agenda pack. Jenny, I'd like to I just ask you to make any comment that you would like to. It is fairly straightforward, but if there's any comments you would like to make.
No, this is just our normal quarterly declaration of expenditure, so just following the same process. And apologies for Darren not being here today, he's on annual leave.
Thank you, Jenny. Are there any questions, Mr Mayor, councillors? No, thank you. I'll move the recommendations in front of you, and they are that the subcommittee 1 receives and notes the information, and 2 notes the sensitive expenditure disclosure information attached to the report as Appendix 1, summary of sensitive expenditure 1 January 2023 to 31 March 2023. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Briggs, thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? No, thank you. Or against the motion? Thank you. I'll have a mover and a seconder, so I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Moving to item 11, which is on page 179 of the pack, and that is the comply with report. I'd like to invite Lakna, and also Karen is going to assist here if necessary. Bradley is away on leave. Just for a little bit of context, this is a regular process that council undertakes, as do a number of councils and other organisations across New Zealand. I will take the report as read. There are officers present who can answer any specific questions, with the exception of the privacy officer who's not able to attend today. If there are any questions relating to the privacy matters that are noted in the findings of the comply with survey, we will take those on notice and respond to the person who has raised the question. Thank you. Karen, is there anything, or Lartner, anything you'd like to add to that?
Nope.
Thank you. Then, Mr Mayor, members, are there any questions on the report? No, thank you. I move the recommendations in front of you, and they are that the subcommittee notes the comply with legal compliance report for the period 1 July to 31 December 2022, notes the table attached as Appendix 1 to the report, which sets out the proposed timeframes for resolving the outstanding non-compliances, and 3, notes the 13 instances of non-compliance that have been resolved, 27 instances of non-compliance being reviewed quarterly and expected to be resolved by 30 June 2023. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Briggs, thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Against the motion? No, thank you. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Thank you, Lartner. Thank you, Karen. Moving on to the information items on our agenda. The first one, this is item 12, and this one is 12A, which is on page 187 of the pack, is the Riverlink update, which is a regular update to this committee. I'd like to invite Tom Biggin, the project manager, to come and speak to his memorandum. Good afternoon, Tom.
Afternoon. Two main points to bring the committee up to speed with. So recommendation 2 noted that the procurement process was nearing completion, and you may have seen press coverage related to that last week. So our alliance team is being led by the Fletcher and ACOM as the spearhead organisations for that, but there's a whole army of consultants and contractors beneath that team. And yeah, it was a really good process, very well run, and yeah, everyone in the team, all of the partners are comfortable that we've got a team that's covering all the bases for quite a broad project, really, in terms of the elements of technical scope that we're trying to deliver. And the second update I wanted to give was we didn't talk about in this paper around consenting, but previous papers to this committee have talked about consenting. Last week we were successful with an award from the New Zealand Planning Institute for best practice for integrated planning and investigations. So that's another commendation for how a complicated resource consenting process was very well run by the team. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tom, and acknowledge that that's great work by the team for both of those updates. Thank you. Mr Mayor, councillors, are there any questions that you have of Tom? Councillor Stellinger, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tom. I'm not sure if you have much of an answer to this one at this stage in the process, but the 2 points which kind of sparked my interest afresh was in paragraphs 11 and 12, where it talks about engaging with the private sector to redevelop key sites, and then further on, strategic property purchases to enable future development. Because my question is there any thought as to what might be involved with that? What forms of engagement and how the project sees those developments occurring in the future? I'll just give you a thought beforehand, because my mind turns immediately to when this has been done by council in the past, these sort of discussions, and it's sometimes met with a bit of controversy, shall we say.
Yep, understood. So in terms of Riverlink strategically is a project delivered under the Central City Transformation Plan, which is a pretty hefty document, 195 pages or something. So Riverlink is really just a project within that strategy. So in terms of the vision of what we're trying to do, that's set out in there. And then now that we're into delivery against that strategy, essentially there's land being acquired through the Riverlink programme by the project partners, often for infrastructure purposes primarily, so that could be transport infrastructure, could be flood protection, etc. And there's residual developable land coming from those acquisitions. And then as Hutt City, we've been through a process of acquiring land on the northern end of Daly Street for urban revitalisation with that vision in mind. So we are currently in the process of working through how we get from the point we're at now, where we get an integrated infrastructure and development design all delivered together. So that was a key part of the procurement process in selecting the right team that was thinking in that way, because we don't want to build infrastructure and then build development. It's to do the two things together. So.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Stillinger?
Yes, but if I can have a follow-up.
Yes, supplementary.
So I guess I'm thinking particularly of the development adjacent to the riverbank on those properties in Daly Street is what's really in my mind.
Yep.
Are you saying that the council would be doing those developments or likely to sell the land to developers who would build, or is that yet to be determined?
So we're working with our legal advisors, our commercial advisors and our delivery partners to strategise how that would work.
So what I'm hearing from that is quite a robust process to occur. Thank you. Are there any further questions? No, thank you. Thank you, Tom. I'll then move the recommendations in front of you, and they are that the subcommittee 1 receives the report and notes the content, and 2, noting that this report was written before the update that Tom has given us, notes that the procurement process is nearing completion, and by the time of this meeting, the project alliance partners will be publicly known and are known, as Tom has said. May I have a seconder, please? Mr. Mayor, thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? Any member who'd like to speak against it? Thank you. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate your update. Now moving to item 12B, which is again regular progress update to this committee on the Nainai project, which is on page 194. And we have Andrew Quinn joining us online. Good afternoon, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to invite you to speak to your memorandum.
Tēnā koutou, ko Andrew Quinn Takawingua. This is the April update to the Risk and Audit Subcommittee. Last report was back in February, and pleased to say good progress has continued to be made in the last 2 months. The progress photographs I think we showed in the February update just showed us progress that we'd made with the structural frame. We've now got most of the structural frame up for the main pool hall, and I've shown some of the pictures at the back of the report. But in general terms, the progress that has been made, we've received consent approval for our stage 4, which is the structural frame. So 4 out of the 6 consents packages have been approved. We've got 2 to go, which is the building envelope and then the fit out. So making good progress to get through the consenting process as we're required to do. Foundation slabs are now complete for 3 main areas in the pool. That's the main pool, the plant room, and the leisure pool, and we'll start to move on to the wet and dry changing rooms as we speak. The structural frame is now well underway, and the majority of the main glue laminated roof beams have been lifted into position, as the picture shows. Off-site procurement, design activity and building consent processing are proceeding in line with the program that we agreed with co-funder Crown Infrastructure Partners. Procurement of the main components for the buildings progressing, and local suppliers continue to be involved in the tendering process. We're up above 80% of the work has gone to local suppliers, which is really pleasing to note. Refurbishment of the old 90 post office and conversion to a community centre has now commenced, and we're starting with structural alterations, and the cost of the 90 pool and fitness centre continues to be reviewed and remains within the 68 million budget cap. Can I take the rest of the paper as read and answer any questions there may be?
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that update, and congratulations again. Good progress being maintained. Mr. Mayor, councillors, are there any questions that you have for Andrew, please? No, thank you. I'll then move the recommendations in front of you, and they are fairly lengthy, so please bear with me. That the subcommittee 1 receives and notes the information, and 2 notes the following progress that has been made on the 90 project. A, all of the required consents have been lodged with council, and 65% of those are approved for construction. B, foundation slabs have been completed for the main pool, plant room and now the leisure pool hall. C, construction of the main structural frame is well underway, and lifting of the main roof beams, to the main pool hall has commenced. D, off-site procurement, design activity and building consent processing are proceeding in line with the program agreed upon with co-funder Crown Infrastructure Partners. E, procurement of the major components for the building is progressing to plan, and local suppliers are involved in the tendering process. F, refurbishment of the old 90 post office and conversion to a community centre has commenced, starting with structural alterations. And G, the cost for the 90 pool and fitness centre continues to be reviewed at regular intervals and remains within the $68 million budget cap. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Briggs, thank you. Is there any member who would like to speak to the motion? No, thank you. Any member who'd like to speak against the motion? I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate you joining us.
Kia ora tātou.
Moving on, item 12C on page 208 of our agenda pack is the Te Pūraho Nuku update, and I'd like to invite John Kingsbury, Head of Transport, to speak to his memorandum.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will just take the paper as read, but just make a couple of notes to some changes that have occurred to the risk reporting since the paper was issued. So we've removed the construction start risk, which is obviously we've started, so that's no longer required, and added in a risk around delay to the construction program. So we started construction a little bit later because of the delay in the moulds for the seawall arriving from Japan via a couple of other countries. So, but we have starting to catch up and we're looking to speed up as much as possible. The weather obviously does play a part, less so than if we were building everything completely on site instead of the seawalls off site and bringing them in. But still, we still need to be able to do some excavation and then place the seawalls in there and better weather than we've had from time to time. So that construction delay around the weather and king tides also play a little bit of a part in that as well as severe weather events. So we will be looking to speed up and do concurrent bays, and we're just assessing that now. So the way the original program was set up was that we finish Windy Point and then we move everything to Sunshine Bay and then carry on. But we're investigating once we finish the current excavation of Windy Point as we go along, whether they can move straight into Sunshine Bay and carry on there. So there is an overlap. But by the time of the next meeting, we'll be able to give an update on that, and we'll also be looking at doing that as we go forward throughout the program. So what that may mean is that there's a little bit more disruption to traffic in the short term, but the program gets finished quicker in terms of the length of time. So I'm open to any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate those points of clarification. Are there any questions, Mr Mayor, councillors, for John? Thank you. I'll move the recommendations in front of you, and they are that the Subcommittee 1 notes the key risks and updates on the Te Puahorenuku Eastern Bay Shared Path project. 2, notes increasing construction costs to deliver the overall Te Puahorenuku Eastern Bay Shared Path project is at 79.9 million, and that discussions are ongoing with Crown infrastructure partners in Wakakatahi to seek additional funding to deliver bays 1 to 4 of the project. And 3, notes the Te Puahorenuku Eastern Bay Shared Path project budgets, both capital expenditure and revenue, approved by Council in the Long-Term Plan 2021 to 2031, following public consultation and updated for Council decisions made through the Annual Plan 2022-23 and the Draft Annual Plan 2023-24 as detailed in the Financial Considerations section of the memorandum. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stellinger, thank you. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye, all those against say no. Thank you. Declare the motion carried. Thank you, John. The last item on our agenda, members, is item 12D, which is on page 214, and that is the Audit and Risk Committee forward work program for calendar year 2023, which, as you are aware, is included in every meeting pack we have. It is a living document, as you will see, that the Howard Road slip review, as discussed today, is noted for a report to come back to our next meeting on the 22nd of June. It's possible we may see a further report there on that one as well. So if so, we will update that. First, I would like to just ask if any member has a question about any of the items or timings that are shown on the work plan. No, thank you. I'll then move the recommendation in front of you. Sorry, Mr Mayor.
One thing to flag, which I think will probably be more appropriate to discuss at our next meeting, but there will be some conversations, and I know there is some thinking around how we grapple with all of the slips that we are having in the city, and obviously the risk that that poses. And I'm pretty anxious every time it rains at the moment. And if we were to have a winter similar to last time, that is going to cause us a number of challenges, not just from the impact of fixing those slips and regaining access and the likes, but also the impact that has on our wider program of work in the city as well. So I suppose I just wanted to flag that as something which will no doubt go to one of the other committees as a focus, but I think it would be appropriate to be thinking of that from a risk point of view as well.
Certainly, and completely agree with you, Mr Mayor, on that. I think it is something that we need to remain very front of mind and open-minded about. And obviously, as discussed in one of our earlier reports in item 9, there's obviously a lot of more information and work to be obtained on the whole water reform process too, which we look at that. There's also, I'm aware, the report back from the Future of Local Government. The review was due in June as well. Again, it's another dimension that we'll all have to think about. But no, very good point. Thank you for raising that, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation in front of you, and that is that the subcommittee receives and notes the forward work program for 2023 attached as Appendix 1 to the memorandum. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stellinger, thank you. I have a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. I have not received any questions for this meeting, so before I ask Councillor Briggs to lead us in the closing karakia, obviously it is Anzac Day tomorrow, and I would like to acknowledge that. Obviously across New Zealand, across Australia, it is a day that is rightly remembered for the service and the challenges and sacrifices that a number of service personnel, past and present, and of course those that are emerging have made and continue to make so that we can all enjoy the freedom and the safety that we do now. So I would like to acknowledge that. And Councillor Briggs, may I then ask you to lead us through the closing karakia?
Certainly, Chair. I'll be on the screen momentarily. Thank you. Everyone, please feel free to join in. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia I te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, tēnā aku, te tēnā, te wairoa I te ara takaturu. Ko ia rā e rongo, whakahiria ake ki runga, kia wātea, kia wātea. Ai rā, ko wātea. Hau, pai marere.
Thank you, Councillor Briggs. That's much appreciated. I'll now declare the meeting formally closed at 3:36 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and mā te wā.